Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out this morning. I know we'll have some people trickle in as time goes along, but I'm happy to be here along with a couple guests that I will bring up. About 25 minutes into this, I've brought some experts in from the field of investing, and they're going to help me. We're going to do Q&A. So I'm going to do a little presentation. We're going to do some Q&A. I've got some questions that I'm going to ask them that I think you might want to ask them. But then we're going to open it up, and you can ask whatever questions you would like to. This morning, we're talking about investing. And so if you look at our schedule, the first time we met, we talked about the importance of stewardship. Then we talked about retirement planning, the options that you have with retirement. Talked a little bit about Social Security and 401(b)(3)s and 401(k)s. Then we took a stab at estate planning and inheritance, and we talked about how that works and what documents you should have in place and who your beneficiary should be. Last time we got together, we talked about budgets, and I hope you all went home and worked on your budgets. I see a few little nods here and there. Today we're going to do investing, and that's the topic for today. Now I've changed the date for the last installment of this because we had the meeting scheduled for the 18th, and that was CW with PM, the Women's Ministries, having Pastor Mike in. So I figured I wouldn't get any of you. I wouldn't get at least the women. So anyway, we pushed that off a week, so the last one will be April 25th, 2026. Same place, same time. Now, you always hear me give my disclaimers, right? For those of you that have been with me, I'm not a lawyer. I do not practice law. And so you should remember that. I'm not an active CPA. And so I will not give you financial advice. Investing is our topic for today, and I'm not a certified financial planner. I'm not an investment banker. I don't hold any licenses. And so whatever you might hear from me today, you need to talk to a professional about it, because I'm just trying to raise your knowledge a little bit. This is an educational session. That's all that it is. I'm hoping to make you feel a little more confident with the terminology and the options you have for investing certain things. When we get to the Q&A section, I'm going to have two friends of mine come up and help me with the Q&A. And they are here as friends of the church. Both of them do investing for people, but that's not why they're here. They're here to help me answer your questions, because you'll have questions that I might not be able to answer. So they're good people, they're great people. I'll introduce them in a little bit. I know them both very well. I don't have any investments with them. They're not here to get investments. In fact, each of them have said, sometimes it's a little awkward when I go to the church. I'm not here to look for customers or clients. I'm here to worship the Lord. And they want you to know that in the same vein as they participate today. Actually, I'll tell you who they are. Dale Hancock, who was right here, and then Adam McDonald, who's over here. And sometimes their firms have kind of funny rules. So here's a disclaimer from Dale's firm that basically says, they're offered through Plan Member Securities Corp., but he's not really selling anything. He just wanted me to give you that slide for the moment. So as I always start, I look for a good definition, right? What is investing? So this time I went to Google instead of ChatGPT, and it told me that the best definition of investment is the commitment of money or resources with the expectation of generating income, profit, or greater value over time, involving risk for potentially higher future returns than simply saving. It's about putting capital like stocks, bonds, real estate to work to grow wealth, not just holding cash for short-term needs. That's a long definition, isn't it? There's a lot of things in there, and we're going to tease those out this morning as we go along. But then, as you know, I always ask the question, is this even biblical? Should we be doing any of this? And specifically with this topic, I get a little nervous that you would spend more time and energy in investing than you do in your spiritual disciplines. And so with that, I've selected a couple passages which are kind of warning passages for you to make sure you don't go down a path that's a path that you really shouldn't go down. So we'll start with Matthew 6:19-21. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, or where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So that's my concern, is where is your heart in all of this? And some of the investments we're going to talk about today, they can be stolen. And they can rust. And moths can eat them up. And so those are called risk analysis. But a good friend of mine invested in some Bitcoin. We'll talk about Bitcoin. And he lost like his number, and thieves came in and swiped it. And he didn't have the proper documentation. And guess what? It's a real loss. And it was a big number. So got to be careful with some of these. So here's a question. I got this picture. Does anybody know where this is? Actually, it doesn't come off too good on the main screen, but any guesses? Do you know? Is that Pelican Hill? Nope, not Pelican Hill. Good guess, though. Big Canyon Country Club. So in Newport Beach, there's a very high-end country club. It's right kind of in the back of Fashion Island. And I worked for a guy that had a membership there. I don't think he was a founding member. And every once in a while, you got to go to lunch with him at Big Canyon. And man, we thought we were hot stuff if we ever got on the list to go to lunch with. It was John Lusk, for those of you that might be wondering. But they have an upstairs dining room, and then down below they have kind of a quick, you can grab a sandwich or a burger or something, and oftentimes he didn't want us to waste too much of our workday, so we had a quick lunch. And downstairs, they had one of these. How many of you have seen these? AI made this for me, right? But it keeps track of what's going on with the stocks. You know AI made it for me because Apple's up 2.45 to 183. So ChatGPT didn't even know to put the right numbers in. But they had one of these, and I observed every time we went that a lot of these very wealthy men are spending more time looking at that throughout their whole lunch than interacting and having a discussion with the people that they're there or their friends. And you can see when it was a bad day, everybody's kind of somber because, look, the market's down. When it's a good day, people were super happy. And that was my first exposure like 40 years ago of people that I thought were out of balance with this. And I'm sure you know people that are like that. Another warning, those who desire to be rich fall into temptation. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. You're saying, why is he bringing these up at an investing session? Because again, I'm nervous for you. I want you to realize that if you love money more than you love the Lord, then your investing's going to be a problem with the Lord. Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Again, I tell you, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. These sting for a lot of us that maybe have some wealth or have some investments that, is that me? And where is my heart? Now, there's this parable, though, with kind of some of the negative behind us, where the Lord gave 3 people talents or coins, 1 10, 1 5, 1 2. And he says, go put these to use. One of them doubled it. Number one took his 10, turned it into 10. One got 5, turned it into 5. One took the 2, and he buried it. And when he came and there was an accounting and a judgment, the Lord was happy with the first 2. And the third one, he says, then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers. And at my coming, I should have received what was my own with interest. So I put this one in because, even back in Jesus' time, they're investing and they're making interest. There's even verses that say, don't charge your brother interest. So there's still commerce. There's still a marketplace. And it's still okay to invest. And we should invest to the extent we can glorify God with it. In fact, I found this in the NIV, Ecclesiastes 11:2. Invest in 7 ventures, yes, and 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land. And so that sounds like a little bit of diversification to me. One of the things that you should do is have a diversification. And as an ex-real estate developer, that happened to me a lot. 7 out of 8 were great, and 1 out of 8 was a big bust. So I'm used to diversification, and I'm used to the concept of, let's be smart about it. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. If you've heard Warren Buffett, you will hear him say that all the time. He makes investments, he leaves them, and they increase little by little by little, and over a long period of time, all of a sudden, there's a lot. A faithful man will abound with blessings, but whoever hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. Okay, are you tired of me putting all of these biblical passages up to say don't do any of it? But yet we're here because reality is some of us and some of you may have some excess cash that you want to invest at some point. So from my budgeting series, we went through a lot of different things you should save for. So I put together a slide that just said, are these things that you should invest? So we talked about emergency funds. This is a minimal amount of money that you have available to you. So if somebody loses their job, or if the transmission goes out, or you need to put new tires on, you need to have some liquid cash that can be invested in some types of savings accounts as long as it's liquid. But basically, emergency funds are for emergencies. And you should set those aside. You shouldn't buy a 30-year treasury note from the U.S. government. It should be liquid. Retirement funds, what did I say? Yes. Yes, you need to invest your retirement funds because you're not going to retire for a while. If you set up a college fund, a 529 plan for your kids to go to college, yes, you should invest that money. Because if the kids are 5 years old and they're not going to go to college for 10 or 12 years, that's a long run where you can make money on those investments. If you set money aside for vacation, like if a year ago you said, I want to go on the Focal Point Ministries cruise and I don't have enough money to go, and you said, okay, I'm going to set up an account and I'm going to set money aside every month for that, yes, I think you can invest that because you don't need it for 2 years or for a year, whatever your plan was. A car fund, I've said this before, if you think you can afford an $800 a month car payment right now for a new car, show me the last 5 years where you've put $800 a month in your savings and it's part of your budget. And certainly that money can be invested. Again, you got to look at the term. I'm going to need it in 3 or 4 years, so you're not going to do a long-term investment like in a piece of property or something. If you're saving money to buy a home, no reason to let that sit in an non-interest-bearing checking account. We should invest in those. If you just want to increase your wealth and increase your estate, then I would say maybe. And the reason I said maybe is the default is, well, yes. But then I'm going to fall back onto our stewardship message and say, why are you doing this? Is this just so he who dies with the most money wins? We had a passage on that said that's not the case. So I had to say maybe on that one. All right. Let's talk about low-risk investments. So the first one would be you can invest your money anywhere where the federal government insures it through the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. They will guarantee that you will get repaid your money up to $250,000 per account. So you go to the Bank of America, please don't do that, but you go to the Bank of America and you buy their CD or something that's making some interest. As long as the bank or the institution has FDIC insurance, you're fully insured. It's a low-risk investment. You're not going to lose it. I was working for a church right out of college, helping them with their budgets. and it was a church in Orange County, and the FDI insurance limit was $100,000. It's $250 today, but they actually had like a $100,000 CD with a local bank. The bank went belly up, and they lost all the interest that they thought they were going to make. They didn't lose the $100,000, but they lost the interest that they thought they were going to make. Now, in today's environments, for a lot of you that are sophisticated, you've seen banks, the Silicon Valley Bank that went out of business, First Republic, and all of these banks, the FDIC came in and they found another bank to buy that bank, and all the deposits were honored. But they don't have to do that. And there's been some discussion about, oh, too big to fail, too big to fail. Anyway, the lowest level investments, FDI insurance. Or you can invest in the United States government. They issue notes and bills. We'll look at that in a minute. And so the full-fledged financial status of the U.S. government, they're likely going to pay you back. You could invest in municipal bonds. These are where states and cities and other things, they are going to issue money and bonds, and you can invest in those. And there's some great tax advantages to investing in those, which I'll talk about in a minute. All right, well, what does the government issue? You can buy what are called treasury bills that run from 4 weeks to a year. Then they changed the word from bills to notes, which have two-year terms, 3-year terms, 5-year terms, 7-year terms, and 10-year terms. And the interest rates are different on all of those, but if you wanted something more than a year, you could buy treasury notes, or you could buy treasury bonds, and those have 20 or 30-year terms. And if you invest in those and you want to get out of them, they can be sold on the secondary market, and so they are fairly liquid, but it's secure. It's a low-risk investment. They have something called TIPS, and those are Treasury inflation protection bonds, and they can be 5, 10, or 30, where they will have the interest rate adjusted for whatever the inflation rate is. And they're called TIPS, and you may want to look a little more at those and maybe include those in your portfolio. And then they have floating rate notes that go from 2 years, and I think the rates get adjusted every 13 weeks. When you invest in these, you pay no state or local income tax. So number one, it's guaranteed unless you feel like the federal government's going to default, and you pay no state and local income tax on it. So municipal bonds, they have general obligation bonds for like schools, public buildings, infrastructure, Belarus. Y'all like Belarus, right? Those are bonds that are floated, and they pay interest, and you can invest in those. And a lot of them are revenue bonds, so they're based on the revenues, like toll roads. So as people use the toll road and that entity gets money, they pay interest on a revenue bond. And these are issued, we call them municipal bonds because they're usually issued by states or other agencies. Water and sewer systems. When I bought my house in San Clemente, there was a sewer bond on my property tax bill. And they said there was a term of 20 years. It was year 5. And after the end of 20 years, it came off of my property tax bill. But they do that, cities and developers do that to finance the upfront cost for some of their developments. And again, no federal tax. And there can be no state tax too. Like if you bought a municipal bond and you live in that state or you live in that place, there can be some tax advantages. Now remember, I'm not giving you tax advice. So whenever you buy these, you should talk to somebody about that because it can get tricky. So if that's the low-level investments, let's look at some moderate risks. And here's a term that people throw around all the time, equities. You can invest in equities. And a lot of people that I've helped here at Compass, they say to me, well, what's an equity? When you see the word equity, it's stocks of public companies, right? You're buying shares of Disney. If you buy 100 shares of Disney, now you're an owner of the Disney Corporation. Now there's lots of people with a lot more shares of Disney that can control that, but you're an actual owner. You can invest in domestic stocks, Or you can invest in international stocks, because you might think, well, England's doing pretty good right now, Germany's doing well, Japan's doing well. I'm going to invest in some public companies in those countries. Or we're also going to talk about how you can blend some of these together. Then a number of years ago, I don't know how long it's been, somebody came up with the idea of mutual funds, which basically says you could put money in a mutual fund, and if a lot of people put money in these funds, they hire a manager to manage that, and they can make all kinds of investments. And they're way smart. They think they're way smarter than you, and so they give you a lot of diversification. They take some risks. We'll talk about some of those later. But you can invest in some mutual funds. Usually the fees in those run 1% or something close to that. Recently, you may have heard the term ETF. And those are like mutual funds, but they're cheaper. They're a lot cheaper. So if a mutual fund charges 1%, some of these ETFs can charge 0.03% or something very, very low. So a lot of people are getting into ETFs. Now, what are these? I mean, there's thousands of mutual funds and ETFs, maybe 10,000, I don't know, but a lot of them get very focused, right? So if you're very interested in utilities that throw off dividends, there's all kinds of utility ETFs. You just type in how many ETFs are there in the US, and Google or ChatGPT will tell you there's a whole ton of them. Okay, also, in equities, there's some things called indices. For example, the Dow Jones Industrial Average. You could invest in an index that tracks exactly what happens in the Dow Jones Industrial Averages. A lot of times in the radio, the Dow was up 20 points today. You could just invest in an index, and all that index does is invest in those 30 shares, right? There's a thing called the S&P 500. S&P used to be Standard & Poor's, but it's always referred to the S&P. They pick 500 companies that they think kind of track the general economy and the health of the United States. You could just say, I don't want to figure out how to invest. I'm just going to invest in this index fund that tracks whatever the S&P 500 does. Now, the NASDAQ, which is actually an exchange, but you can buy an ETF or a mutual fund that tracks the top 100 in the NASDAQ, all of them in the NASDAQ, specific areas that you have an interest in. You can track all of those. So that's an option for you. There's some moderate risk because what are we investing in? We're investing in stocks. If the company isn't doing well, what happens? The stock's going to drop in value. So you might say, well, you said 30 companies in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So there they are. Those are the 30 today. I hope this schedule's right. So if you want to buy an index, and you want to buy it tied to the Dow Jones Industrial Average, there's the 30. Now, companies go in and out, and you know that because you see Amazon and Apple. And we've had the Dow Jones Industrial Average for hundreds of years. So sometimes companies go out when they're not performing well, and new companies go in. Standard & Poor's, I couldn't put the 500 on one slide. And so I took a couple of the sectors or the categories. So they have technology, they have finance, they have consumer retail, they have healthcare, they have energy, industrial. And you can see the companies in those. The industrial category, they'll have stocks like Caterpillar and GE and Honeywell and Boeing. Those are names that you know. Energy will have ExxonMobil, Chevron, and ConocoPhillips. So it's pretty diversified. And I guess the gurus at Standard & Poor's decide who goes in and who goes out of that 500, but that's an option. Here's the top companies by size in the NASDAQ. See if you can see anything unique about these, that they're the same or the different. Apple, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Alphabet C, Alphabet D, because they have two types of stocks, right? That's Google, Meta, Tesla, Broadcom. A lot of these are tech companies, or software companies, or media companies, but at least here are the top companies that trade in the NASDAQ, just to give you some idea of what that might look like. So then you might say, well, how do those do over time? So I found this chart on ChatGPT, And this shows the growth of $10,000 over a 30-year period. So the top one, Dow Jones, is the blue on the bottom, and you can see from 1995 up to 2025, that's a pretty good little arch there, right? That thing grew over time, little by little. The S&P 500 grew a little more at 10%, and the NASDAQ grew at 13%. And so these are fairly decent returns over a long period of time if you want to invest in one of these indices. Now, I know that that's a nice smooth line, and I know that that doesn't always happen. So I found this one, which I thought was a little bit more reflective. It's the same curves, but it's showing you the ups and the downs of life, right? So in the year 2000 to 2002, we had this thing called a dot-com crash. And look, they all kind of tanked at the same time. And then they recovered. That recovery was not as quick as some others, but there was a recovery, and you can see by 2007 or 8, they had kind of recovered, and then boom, we had a financial crisis, and what happened again? We had this drop. And then we were kind of off to the races, and then COVID hit, and they all dropped. And then recently, especially for the NASDAQ, all these tech companies, they've been doing really well. The thing has gone up. So life is not always the smooth line. It is over time, but it can have these funny little blips. Okay, that was what I call moderate risk. Then there's a high risk section. I'm just going to throw these numbers up, but they're hedge funds, there's private equity, there's real estate. Hey, let's just go buy a house and turn it into an Airbnb or a small rental, for a week or two, or VBRO. And we'll make a lot of money. And people have done that. In San Clemente, people, they went and bought 5 or 6 of these, but it takes a lot of work, and there is some risk to it. You may not rent them out. The people that rent it may trash them. You need insurance. You can invest in options, right? There are vehicles called options that you can invest in those where you think the price is going to go up, so you buy an option, you hold it, and then when the price goes up, you convert the option into stock, and you just made some money. That works. Unless the option that you're buying goes down, and then you've lost money. So there are options and there's futures. These guys will probably come up and say, oh no, they're not high risk. We can manage that for you. But just so you know, there are other options outside of what I consider moderate risk. So I took a look at the Orange County median home price from 1980 to 2025, because I want to show you there's dips and dives in here too. From 1980 to 1990, that's a pretty good rise. And then we dropped and we recovered pretty good. But then in 2005, which is about the time I left the development business and worked for Compass Bible Church, there was this big crash, right? So if you thought you were going to buy a condo somewhere and make it big, you can, as long as you have holding power and you have cash reserves and you can manage through tenants that come in and come out. Just wanted to show you the curve. You can invest in currencies, like foreign currencies. You can invest in the yen. You can invest in all kinds of currencies. You could invest in digital currencies, and that's the Bitcoin side of this. And you can do that. I think it takes a highly sophisticated investor to do some of that, because there are risks and rewards of doing that. And I would be kind of very careful. And I would tell you, like for Bitcoin, it's not like Apple. When Apple sells more of their products, their revenues go up, their income goes up. They don't pay dividends. Have they started paying dividends? They're paying a little bit of dividends now. But you're investing that, hoping that the value of that stock goes up and up and up and up. And you can analyze what they're doing, and you can study their annual reports, because they're all online. And you can make investments in that. When you say, I want to invest in the yen, or you want to invest in Bitcoin, there's nothing to look at. Like, there's no company behind it. There's no revenues. There's no revenue stream. There's no history that, you know what, this company's had a dividend for 30 years, and they've increased the dividend every year by 5%. And you can look back at that and say, well, I think they're going to keep doing that. So it's really the values are based on whatever someone else is willing to pay for that at the time. Now, maybe foreign currencies are maybe not as wild as the swings that you've seen in Bitcoin. The same thing for precious metals like gold and silver, right? When you invest in gold, you're investing in gold not because there's a company behind it that has, lots of years of history. You just think it's a hedge against inflation. You think if the whole country tanks, then at least you're going to have gold available to you. But the ups and the downs of that are based on maybe some history, but again, nothing behind it. You can enter into transactions that have a lot of leverage. Recently, I heard, when the Bitcoin ran up, it's like I might go to a friend and say, "Hey, let's buy some Bitcoin." So we put money in Bitcoin, and it goes way up. Well, we should buy some more, but we don't have any money. So let's borrow against that increase in Bitcoin, and let's buy some more. So they do. They have legends, or they can get a margin. And then they buy more, and then Bitcoin goes up again. Hey, let's buy some more. All right, let's buy some more. So we buy some more, it goes up again. Let's go up again, let's go up again. And that works as long as it's going up again. And as soon as it's not going up again, and it drops in value, like this graph would show you, then you're in trouble, because now the person you borrowed the money from, or you leveraged it from, or you had a margin account, they say, "Excuse me, I need you to pay down some of your margin account." And you say, I don't have the money to do that. And then that begins a big problem. So this was the Bitcoin price. And again, these are level numbers, because as you know, lately it got up to 125,000 per Bitcoin. Now it's down around 80 or something. So somebody saw something at 125 that they were willing to pay that. And now we're down. So this is more volatile. Can you invest in it? A lot of people made a lot of money investing in Bitcoin. We're not providing investment advice. We're just showing you the volatility in that. I did gold as well, just because I thought gold would be fun to look at. And you can see it's kind of flat, and then we have the peak, and then we have a drop, and then we're back up, and then it's back down. Sometimes this goes up and down all the time. So here are my final comments before we get into some Q&A. You need to watch your motives. You need to be careful. You need to do what I call a risk analysis. And then I would suggest you get some help. Pick a good advisor. Because there are people that have dedicated their life to this. They go to school, they get MBAs, they study it, they know it. And if you find an honest one, instead of someone that's just trying to get you to invest so they can make commissions, then that's really the best route for you. And it could be somebody that's done some of this. I had a friend that was doing some foreign currency investments for a while, but he was devoting 2 or 3 hours a day watching how all that worked and thinking he could figure that out. And he was making some money for a while, but then he got out of it because he didn't have enough time in his schedule to devote to all of that. So those are kind of my final comments. What I'd like to do now is remind you of Proverbs 15:22. Without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed. Listen to advice and accept instruction, that you may gain wisdom in the future. Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. Now, I told you I don't give advice, right? But for many of the widows that I've helped that have lost their husbands and they've had some investments and they don't even understand any of these basics, I went with them to talk to their investment banker. And when they started explaining some of this, I had to stop them and slow down and tell the widow, this is what he's saying. This is what all that means. And so, you can certainly find friends and other people to come and help you, especially in a pressing time of need. But I think that would be smart of you to do. Okay, so we're going to enter into the question period now. And I'm going to ask Adam to come up and grab a seat, and Dale to come up and grab a seat. And I'm going to move that podium off with some help from Bill Evanston. Oh, you put me in the middle. Why don't you sit there, Adam? That way my computer can still be tied in. Let's go this way. So I know some of you brought questions because you told me you did. And I'm happy about that. But again, just as a matter of introduction, Adam, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been at Compass, your family composition, and what you do for a living. And then Dale, many of you know Dale, but Dale, I'd like you to do the same thing.
Morning, everyone. I'm Adam McDonald. I have been coming to Compass since 2011 when my wife and I got married, and we joined Thrive that year. I have two children, Presley and Parker. Presley's 10 and Parker is 8. Both of them are in Awana. And my wife and I have been in Thrive ever since 2011, and we're mentor couples now in Thrive.
Experienced.
Yes. For whatever that looks like. And we live in Koto, not too far from here. So I guess in terms of investing, I was 19 when I had my first job. I worked as an equity analyst for Goldman Sachs in their Hong Kong office in 2000.
Equity, stock?
Stocks. Yeah.
Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, yes. And I worked on their trade desk. I was telling Dale before, my 3 clients that I covered were Fidelity, Putnam, and Scudder. Scudder no longer exists. And we looked at stocks, equities in Asia, excluding Japan. So that was where I sort of cut my teeth and learned how to evaluate stocks. And fast forward in life, and I took a job as a financial advisor with a company, A.G. Edwards, and worked there for a while before it was bought by Wachovia Securities, which in 2008 was bought by Wells Fargo Advisors. And my group and I left there in 2018 and began working at First Republic Bank, which, as you heard up here, was one of the 2 banks that failed, Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic in 2023. And my group, we, before First Republic had any sorts of problems, left and went to RBC Wealth Management, which is Royal Bank of Canada Wealth Management. My partner and I, we manage about $1.5 billion of private money in Orange County. And you can Google us. So we've been doing this for a while. We run specific portfolios for clients. We do it with a discretion-based angle, which basically means people come to us and they give us their money, and we work through a fee-for-service type thing, but they essentially invest alongside of us in the portfolios that we manage. And that's about all there is to say about that.
Thank you. Dale?
Good morning. Like Rick, I have a real estate background. I worked for a syndicator. We did limited partnerships for many years, but I went back to school, in the early 90s and got a degree and got a master's in financial planning. Started doing taxes, got licensed for securities, again in the mid 90s. Eventually left the real estate, job I had and went basically independent. So I do taxes, investments, and a little bit of insurance. Not a big insurance, person, but have that background. I've been with many different broker-dealers for a variety of reasons. Either supervisors left, they rebranded, and got, one actually went out of business, got merged into another. So again, you saw my current broker-dealer is Plan Member Securities. So I've been coming to the church, my wife and I, since 2011 also. I have 2 sons. One is Keith Hancock, the music director, so most people are aware of him. His wife's also musical, 2 grandkids. We live in Rancho Mission Viejo.
Great.
And we go to Compass, ABF on Sunday morning. I'm an usher on Saturday nights. Also a men's Bible leader on Friday morning. help out with parking, which is one of
Yay!
Rick's on special events.
Yeah, I was always Melody's dad at church because everybody knew my daughter. And it's like, oh, you're Melody's dad. Oh, you're Keith's dad. They'll know that you're an actual human being on your own one of these days. But so I've got some questions to start out with that maybe you want to ask them. But how do you help people understand risk tolerance? So Adam, I walk in and I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do, or what kind of questions do you ask, or how do you understand kind of the customer that you have in front of you?
Well, when it comes to risk tolerance, there's, well, let me back up. When it comes to investing, really you have one enemy that you're dealing with, and that enemy is time, right? So one of the first questions I want to ask people is, for the amount of money that you have, how much time do you have? When do you need, this money? If you come to me and you say, hey, you know what, I have X amount of money and I'm going to need it in about 6 months, I'd say don't invest that money. Doesn't make a whole bunch of sense to put money that you need or has great importance in a short period of time at a high degree of risk, right? So you can go back to those sorts of instruments that Rick was talking about that have FDIC insurance related to them, or government bonds, things that can stand a short period of time and limit your risk. I also think that oftentimes, colloquially, we've played around with words, and words have different meanings to different people, right? So when I'm talking about risk, it might have one meaning to me, and when somebody else is in the room and they're talking about risk, it might have a different meaning to them. Oftentimes, people will kind of pair the word risk and return together. So sometimes people walk into a room, and really what they're saying is, I'd like to experience this type of return over X period of time. Well, then you have to back out of the idea of risk tolerance, and you have to say, well, in order to achieve what the objective is that you've come into the room with, we have to ask, are you capable of dealing with the risk that's associated with that objective?
You mean like lose money?
Like lose money, or maybe not lose money, but experience. Like, I like to put it like this: not everybody can eat 3 tacos, get on a roller coaster, and have the same experience, right? Like, it sort of varies person to person, right? So, when you hold a piece of paper, when you buy Apple stock, you don't experience the joy of gain or the defeat of loss unless you put that piece of paper back out into the marketplace and sell it, right? So a lot of what people interpret as the joy of gain or the defeat of loss is really just watching their paper add value or lose value in the marketplace that they're currently holding that paper. No different than your house. Imagine you walked out of your home every day and on your mailbox there was a ticker symbol like Rick showed up there. And every day you walked out of your home, you saw the value of your house minute by minute changing. Imagine the anxiety that could be associated with that, right? Thankfully, that's not something that we deal with in our lives. But it is happening. It's actually invisibly happening to your house every second of every day. The value is shifting. But you're living there, and you're living there free of anxiety in the comforts that you have. And, so I think it's important for people to have a discussion with whomever they're dealing with, and sort of get these words out into the open and understand what those definitions mean to each other, and then get on the same page from a jargon standpoint, and then it's a little bit easier to have those conversations.
So I think we covered my second question too. I mean, sometimes I tell people that to adopt, especially if they're asking me about their retirement investments, and you're comfortable with your investments, then don't look at it. Don't look at it. You maybe once a quarter go back and look and say, I wonder how that's doing. And by not looking at it, that takes away some of the stress. of Dale. So, I hear people say, well, use this 70-30, 70%, 30%, 60%, 40%, 80%, 20% method, or take 110 minus your age when investing. What does that mean? We hear those terms. What does it mean?
Let me just go back to your last question that Adam answered on the risk analysis, that pretty much every new client that I'm talking to, I do a risk analysis with a questionnaire and come up with, where are they on a risk scale from 1 to 5, 1 being very conservative and, 5 being very aggressive. And a lot of people will come up with pretty much a moderate risk profile, maybe a 3 or a 4. And that kind of correlates to probably a 60-40 profile, which might mean 60% stocks, 40% bonds. Somebody more aggressive might be in that 80 to 90% stocks, 10 to 20%, cash and fixed income. So that's where that 60-40, 80-20, or conservative 20-80 possibly, more on the conservative side. Some conservative people want no risk at all, and they're, again, that probably no stocks at all. No stocks, no real estate, just fixed income and cash.
So those are the percentages. They get thrown around a lot, something you can consider. But when dealing with somebody, that's something that you could ask them about. I've heard about this investment triangle, too. Has anybody talked to you guys about investment triangles? Just a triangle, no? Adam, what's an investment triangle?
Basically, this is like you're putting your high-risk investments at the top of the triangle and working your way down to sort of low-risk investments. And I think textbooks have used this for years, kind of going, back to illustrate to people risk and the investments associated with it, just much like what Rick went through here earlier, where he said, hey, look, here's your high-risk investments, private equity, hedge funds, things of this nature, maybe some real estate deals. You have your moderate risk kind of in the middle of that triangle where your equities are going to sit, and then your lower risk, investments. So,
as I've traveled around with widows, it seems like they always either put that questionnaire in front of them or they take this risk triangle and say, you see this top part? I'm going to be as risky as anybody in the world, but I'm going to have enough of a base that if I lost it all, it's not going to kill me, or if I lose some of it over a short period of time, maybe in a longer period of time. So I think we've kind of covered that. My HR department wants to know which funds I want to invest in. What do I tell them?
Tell them to invest in the ones that go up.
It's just what we've already talked about, right? You need to come up with what you're comfortable with. And they have equities, and they have money market funds, and they have alternative types of investments. They have mutual funds that will say, here's a large cap, which means these are big companies. Here's some growth companies. And they always tell you what the returns have been on those. So I think we've talked enough about those. But if I'm an investor out there right now and I'm thinking, is there like a minimum dollar amount that I should have before I pick individual stocks? Or should I just, basically put money into mutual funds and ETFs?
I would say just with a new investor, to avoid, the individual stocks, is to do, again, the well-balanced type of mutual fund. ETFs, you generally, need a brokerage account, not always. So again, it's what's your risk tolerance? Diversification. Do you buy everything in one particular stock? Not advised.
Yeah, I think it also depends on, is this question asking, is the person doing it individually, or are they using a professional to do it? Because in my world, if somebody comes to me, I'm likely going to use individual stocks. We really don't use mutual funds or ETFs, exchange traded funds. Reason being, there's additional cost associated there. So if I have a client and they're, paying for my services, I'm not going to increase the cost of that payment by using strategies that have their own embedded costs within them. So
So if I have $5,000 to invest,
yeah, you're probably going to need to use a mutual fund or
Yeah.
exchange traded fund if you want diversification, or if you want concentration risk, you can choose an individual stock and do that.
so just for the people, I'm just, if you have 5,000 to invest, and you want the diversification, you're probably going to look at one of these indices or something like that.
Yeah.
If you've got $100,000, well, I mean, there's some number that it begins to make sense to have your advisor help you pick those stocks. But can we talk about those bonds for a minute? Are they risk-free?
They are not.
They are not. So back in the 60-40, well, we'll put 60% in stocks and 40% in bonds. Those bonds are not risk-free either.
If you hold your arms out like this, right, and then you tilt your body one way, let's call this side of your arms interest rates, let's call this side of your arms bond prices. Interest rates go down, bond prices go up, interest rates go up, bond prices go down. So you buy a bond on the day it's born, you hold it to maturity, you'll get your money back. And you'll also get the yield along the way, assuming the bond doesn't default. But along the way, the actual price of the bond is moving along with interest rates, and a lot of people don't understand that.
And bonds can default. Lehman Brothers,
1994, Orange County talked about that.
Orange County filed bankruptcy. And so their bonds had to be restructured because somebody made a play on where they thought the market was going to go. And Robert L. Bob Citron, some of you remember his name, made some investments and they didn't work out. But that's rare. I mean, I've heard about some Washington state bonds that went in default. So what does this term rebalance mean? I hear that thrown around a lot. You need to rebalance your portfolio. If you're doing it on your own, what would that mean? And if you have an advisor that's doing it for you, what would that mean? And to these two advisors, I'm going to ask them, how often would you rebalance a portfolio? I come to you, I give you the money, and then you go play golf at the Big Canyon Country Club and watch the ticker tape downstairs. Or are these actively managed investments? Or Dale, how does that work for your client?
Most of my clients I have in managed accounts. I'm the manager managing the managers. And they will, based upon, the risk profile that it's set up for that investment, they're going to be doing this on a regular basis, probably on a quarterly basis. So if the allocation gets out of whack, what I call it, if they were that 60-40 and all of a sudden stocks becomes up to 70%, they're going to rebalance and readjust. I don't see that many individual people, doing that. Again, it's more time consuming for the individual to do it. It certainly you can do it, but again, I see in my business, the managers are doing that for you. If you have, either a managed account, or maybe a single mutual fund.
In my business, it's a little bit different because we are the actual managers of the money. So we rebalance on a quarterly basis if the client has not added additional funds during the course of the year. Everything's computer systems. So once you kind of set up the holdings that you have in the portfolio, you can set the rebalance to whatever frequency you'd like to have it at. But rebalancing, what it really means is kind of going back to what Dale said, when a position grows outside of the scope of what you've said that position, that stock should be. If it's going to be 10% of the portfolio, it's grown to 15%. You're selling from that position to buy the position in the portfolio that has shrunk in value. And the idea here is you're consistently buying low and selling high, right? Which is sort of a good thing when you're investing. So
Is there a time that you've made enough in one stock or one sector and you just want to lock in your profits? Like Apple stock. If you bought it 20 years ago and you see it going up and up and up, and this is back to the risk tolerance, but you could say, maybe we should take some of our profits, take that and invest it in Amazon or something else. Or how do you have the long term saying, well, once I took some money off the table, like it's not at risk anymore, and then Apple continues to explode in value, you feel like an idiot. So those are probably personal questions, but that's part of the rebalance too, right? We don't think this company has as much growth as this other company, so we're going to take it out of here, take your profits, you did well, and put it in another one. So you may have some of those conversations with your advisors.
Just to also add, it depends on the type of account that you're doing this in as well. There's taxable accounts and there's tax-deferred accounts. You can rebalance with a reckless abandon in a tax-deferred account because you're not creating taxes by doing it. In a taxable account, as you rebalance, you've got to look at what those potential tax consequences and effects can be, right? So depending upon the individual investor's, scenario, that can have, gratuitous or ingratuitous tax consequences to them at the end of the year. So it's kind of important to, bear that in mind. In the same breath, it's also important to understand that performance and realized gains in accounts are very different from each other. And if you want to see your account continue to grow, sometimes you have to make decisions that are not tax-based in order to continue to see the growth happen in the account. So to Rick's point, you might have owned a particular stock for a long period of time. Maybe you own MasterCard for, a period of time, and you owned it alongside Visa, and you've decided, hey, it's just not growing as much as a different position that I have over here on the bench that I'd really like to invest in. Maybe it makes sense at that point to take some gain from that one stock and bring in these other positions off the bench so you can continue to have performance happen and account growth. And I'm also going to make a plug for Rick and what he does here. When you have stocks that have these realized gains, an opportunity that you have is to basically tithe that stock, some portion of it to the church, because now you're not transferring that gain onto your tax consequence anymore. And then you could take money that you have saved in discretionary cash or something like that to rebuild the position at a higher tax base. So it's a very good charitable strategy as well to look at those stocks where you have gains from a long period of time and use those as ways that you tithe or give to charitable organizations.
So we did talk about that, right? Kind of the best vehicle is to give appreciated stock. You paid $1,000 for something that's worth $50,000. You give it to the church, you get a $50,000 tax deduction, and you never pay tax on that. And then if you're over 70 and a half, you should be giving your taxable IRAs to the church instead of just taking money out of your normal accounts. Because when you give a portion of your IRA, which if you take it directly, you're going to pay tax on that. If you give that IRA to the church, you pay no tax on it. And so that's the second best way to give to the church. But can we go to what's an annuity? And when are those ever appropriate to invest in? A lot of these sometimes it's in a retirement account, but I guess we've got fixed and variable annuities. What's an annuity?
This is a complicated and costly subject for a lot of people. There are fixed annuities that will pay just like an interest, like a bank account, or it can be tied to a stock index fund. Again, on the fixed side, so again, there's guaranteed principal. You can't go down, you can't lose what you put into it as long as you don't take it out before the expiration date. So there's the fixed side, lower risk, but much lower return. On the variable side, again, much more complicated. They actually, a variable annuity will have what's called sub-accounts instead of mutual funds. Similar idea, a basket of stocks, bonds, real estate, but there's extra fees involved. The most important one is, again, because of the guarantees not losing money, there's mortality and expense charge, M&E charge. That's roughly around 1.3% per year. The reason you go into an annuity is for the guarantees. Part of that guaranteed principal return based at death, or you do it for guaranteed lifetime income or lifetime growth on that investment until death. Again, I have used annuities, again, in my business. Again, a very small percentage for the people. It does make sense for some people, especially on the more conservative side. That gives kind of a broad overview. Again, they are expensive. They can be beneficial, that if you have guarantees and you keep them, you're not taking money out. It could be, the death value could be much more than the actual account value.
I would be very careful with them. If you want to do an annuity, talk to somebody that really knows how they work and what they do. But I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to open it up to you. And this is going to be the easiest question I ask. How does the war impact my investing decisions?
It shouldn't.
I agree.
Yes. Somebody came in and asked me that, so what's going on in the market? And I'm like, you got to think long term, right? And you hear that again and again and again and again. But we're at about an hour, and I promise to have 15 minutes of formal Q&A. This is where you get to ask questions, and then if there's some question you don't want to ask in front of everybody, we'll all hang out for a little bit longer, and you can ask us those specific questions, given the disclaimers that we gave you at the beginning of the day. So who has a question? Something that I said that prompted a question? Dick Bannister.
Yes, sir.
Speak loudly.
I would like to know how Bitcoin gets value. What's backing Bitcoin or digital currencies?
I think I said that. Nothing.
That's what I thought. That's why I don't invest.
Market value, whatever people think it's going to be worth, or just pure speculation as I look at it.
Over here.
I've known some guys who did some investing with real estate before. Would it be more smarter or beneficial to invest in property or land?
Property or land? That's a you question.
Yeah. That's the most common thing that people do sometimes when they've created some extra money. They want to buy the condo down the street and they can manage it. And then you have tenants and you have other issues. During COVID, certain cities and states said you can't even kick anybody out if they don't pay the rent. And so I think you got to have good cash reserves, deep pockets to cover that. If you think you want to buy a lot and build a house, there are times in my little curve that would have been the smartest thing you could ever do. But those are longer term issues, because when you buy land, you got to make sure it wasn't a Superfund site filled with toxic waste and materials. You have to get it entitled at the city or the county that you're working in. Then you have to make sure all the utilities are there. And if they aren't, those have to be designed. I mean, you just can't say, okay, let's go put in water. You're hiring engineers to tell you how to put all the utilities in, and then you're hiring engineers to build your house, to give you your house plans. You have an architect involved. And then you pull permits, and you got to find the right people to build. Buying land can be very rewarding. I can tell you that from experience, but I would also say I did it with people that this was our livelihood, and we've done it a long time together. I think the best way to do that is maybe find a fixer-upper, that's way below market because it's trashed. If you have skills to be able to put into that house, you can fix it up, and then you could sell it. You could flip the house. You can watch all your TV shows that, show you how to do that, but that could be real. It's a little tougher with interest rates where they are today, but I think you can do either one. One takes a lot longer, and I had a friend, he's not here today, that, I think he bought 10 houses out of state, and he bought them at what he thought was a great price, and 20 years later, the values are still the same that he paid for them 20 years ago. So you live in California where you don't have a realistic view of what real estate values do. You just don't. Because for a while, everybody wanted to live here. I know now everybody wants to leave, but we still have infrastructure. We still have a desirous place to live. You can do good ministry at Compass Bible Church. Why wouldn't you live here? And so there's still a lot of people wanting to come in. So it's a little bit easier to say, okay, how much does the house have to go up for me to make money? It's got to go up by the commission, because when you sell it, you're going to pay a 6% commission or a negotiated commission, I guess in California, they're probably all still 6%. And there's escrow fees, and then there's inspections, and it's a pretty big undertaking, but could be lucrative. Bill, I'll get to you. You're next.
Okay, I've got some money to invest. I have some money to invest, and you're saying 6 months, keep it someplace where you get it. So if I had a moderate, let's say I could handle a moderate risk type of investment, what time frame am I looking at to have that investment, that money invested?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say 5 years plus. And I think, in most cases, you have that money invested for 10 years. I'd say 95% of the time or more, you're going to see that you've had a positive return. You invest that money for 20 years, it's almost 100% of the time. That's about as close as you're going to get to that. So, but I'd say 5 years is what you're really targeting for what you're talking about.
Get you through the ups and the downs.
If you have a small amount of money or any amount of money and you only have 6 months, would you recommend putting it in a CD?
I think that depends on where interest rates are, cyclically speaking, at that point in time. Because there are different types of CDs too. Is it a liquid CD that you can draw the money out of at any point in time, or is it a CD? Could be, okay. So maybe that. If interest rates are going to be kind of sticky where they're at, I would probably use a money market mutual fund that's going to provide similar rates as the CD, but it's going to pay monthly the interest and also allow you to have access to the money at any given point in time. CDs generally lock up money, and then you have to break the CD to get it out. So I only would recommend short-term money going into CDs if you know beyond a shadow of a doubt you're not going to need access.
Yeah. I have another question. Do you deal with cryptocurrency?
No,
I do not.
we're not allowed. My broker-dealer doesn't allow us to do it.
Yeah, I am allowed to buy certain things at my broker-dealer, but I personally don't, so no.
But I know people that were in my men's Bible study here 15 years ago that bought Bitcoin at $1,000 a coin. So,
Do you know anything about cryptocurrency?
Yes, there are ETFs out there in what I call a lower. It's not low. There's still risk involved, but you can buy either that or other cryptocurrencies in an ETF wrapper without having a wallet, and losing, the money. Like what Rick said, you lose your key.
so all of a sudden you need a wallet, you need a number, you need an account number, it needs to be secured. And
Yes,
it's better.
so there are investments out there.
It's better today than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, you had to have this number, and people were engraving it because it was like, what, a 30 or 40-digit number, and if you lost that,
You're done.
bye-bye.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I lose things all the time. I mean, how am I going to keep track of that? I can't keep track of my passwords. So, I mean, there were some barriers to entry. Some of those have gotten a lot easier now to invest. There's been some big busts that you read about. Again, we're not giving advice. You asked the question, are we in it?
Yeah, so actually it is about the cold wallet because the platforms that you buy on like Coinbase,
Yes.
to know if you can leave it on Coinbase, how safe is that? Or should you move it to a cold wallet, and which one?
If you have it on Coinbase, the purpose of having it on Coinbase is that you're able to trade it right there on Coinbase. But if your desire is to hold, and then you should have it in a cold wallet.
How do you know which cold wallet is safe? I mean,
The coldest one.
Whatever's the chilliest. Well, the idea of a cold wallet is it's essentially an external hard drive, right? So, I mean, safe in terms of maybe.
like the company you get the cold wallet from. How do you know you're getting a cold wallet from a legitimate, safe company? You're using their wallet. So
Well, but when it's on the wallet, the company has no access to it. So you're buying a hardware piece. So it is yours. It's no different than the wallet you have in your pocket. The only person that has access to it is the one that, has the physical contact with it and also the codes to get in.
In the back.
We can't hear you. Can you speak up a little louder?
There was an article online about ways to invest in the housing market without buying real property.
Cash.
Is that
What was it?
I think she's talking about cash flow notes on property.
Chris, can you give her a microphone? I think you're doing that.
Check.
Yeah.
Sorry, my voice is really quiet. I saw something online about ways to invest in the housing market without actually purchasing property. Do you know how that works? Are you contributing, putting money in that people are using that for their mortgages, or how does that?
So there are formal ways to do that in what's called a real estate investment trust. And all they do is own real estate, and they manage it. Like for a while, Don Bren in Orange County had a public REIT that you could invest in, and it was basically all of his commercial properties and apartments. And he thought that his values could go up by doing that. And you could buy those just like you would buy equities and stocks. I think what you're talking about is kind of a new way to invest your money. It's not in an exchange. It's not something that these people would handle at all. So it's kind of outside of that. So that brings in a little more risk. You're giving money to somebody that's going to buy a house. If I could get all of you to give me $20,000 and we go buy that condo for sale over there and we turn it into a rental property and you're willing to wait 10 years to get any money back, well, we'll give you a 4 or 5% return along the way. But the real money we're going to make is when we sell it at the end of the day. That's kind of like a private equity investment. And there's lots of those. And some of those are absolutely fantastic. But when I hear it's on the internet and it's a cash flow, I don't really know exactly what it is. And that would raise a little red flag, for me.
If somebody's telling you to go to a seminar to learn more about this, maybe don't do it.
Watch out for unregulated investments is the basic answer.
Or just be willing to lose it all. Yeah.
I have a question in regards to fixed income and bond, or the mix between stocks and bonds. Bonds seem to me just as risky as stocks because of the interest rate fluctuations, volatility. The Fed raises rates, lowers rates. People think they're going to lower rates, and they didn't lower rates, and the bond market just starts going crazy. So I mean, it just seems like it's just as much risk, and why not either invest more in stocks or invest in something outside of stocks and bonds?
Right, as Adam said, if you buy into a bond fund or you buy a bond and you want to sell it later, you can sell that bond for more money than you bought it for, or you can sell it for less money depending on which way the interest rates went. But if you wanted to buy a bond, like a Lehman Brothers AAA rated bond that I invested $10,000 in somewhere in my past, and I'm going to hold it to maturity, So I'm going to get that 8% because I'm never going to sell it. So I'll get the 8%. But if you buy into a bond fund, they've bought hundreds of bonds, and there's people wanting to get in and out all the time, so they have to sell their bonds and buy bonds, and those are subject to fluctuation, market value fluctuations. If you can hold them to the end, then you get whatever interest rate there was, unless Lehman Brothers goes bankrupt, and then you get zero, which is what I got. But I went into a AAA rated bond that was not supposed to have any risk.
Practically speaking, too, I think there's a couple things to understand about bonds that academically doesn't get taught very well. So if you go, we live in Orange County. We have one of the largest dealers of bonds on the face of the planet, PIMCO, in Fashion Island, okay? And they have a flagship bond fund. And you can go online and you can look up their total return bond fund. And you can look at the return that you would have gotten if you had placed your money in this bond fund over a 10-year period. And you're going to note that it's less than 2%, okay? So it's not huge returns that you're typically experiencing if you're a holder of a bond fund for a very long time or a holder of an individual bond for a very long time. So when you're constructing a portfolio and somebody comes in and says, okay, well, my risk tolerance suggests that I should have a 70-30 portfolio or a 60-40 portfolio, the bonds that are now making up that 40 or 30%, I know as an advisor aren't going to make the types of returns I need to make to get to what the equivalent return should be for a moderate investor, right? So do you think I need to take more or less risk in the stocks that make up the 60 or 70%? Correct. So now I need to take more risk in those stocks versus another way to look at the portfolio might be I could have less risky stocks and be 100% equity based and maybe some large cap value stocks that pay a strong dividend, a Procter & Gamble, a Walmart, Pepsi, things like this. And you're going to end up at the same place. So sometimes people take on more risk or they do a lot more gymnastics. And my kids go to gymnastics, so I'll digress for a second. I watch these girls. They're really, really good, and they go from one corner of the mat to the other, and they fly through the air, and they flip, and they tumble, and all this crazy stuff. It's impressive. But I do think I could speed walk just as fast from one corner to the other and with a lot less risk. So I'm just saying, sometimes people do a lot of extra gymnastics to try to create some sort of portfolio that looks like it's well diversified or academically sound, but in practical, application, there's a simpler way to do it.
I'd like to add just on the bond funds in general, the managed accounts are probably not going to use that generic, bond aggregate, index. They're going to be using, foreign bonds or high yield to get a better return. And again, being traded, they're managing it. They're not just buying and holding it because the returns have not been that great.
What other questions? If you were way back.
I'm sorry, we can't hear you. Hold on. Christopher's bringing a microphone.
What hard lessons you've learned as being seasoned professionals in this field? Personally, what lessons, did you invest in something and it went south and you really learned a valuable lesson from that? Like a mistake, what you learned from a mistake you maybe made or,
Well, I think a main lesson that I've probably learned from investing, well, there's two. I'll share a practical and a theological. Practically, it's just patience. Investing will teach you patience again and again and again. Another way to define investing is it is the act of moving money from impatient people to patient people. That's simply what investing is. It favors the patient. So the more patient you can be, the more likely you have for a stellar outcome. Secondly, like Rick had up there at the beginning a verse that I like to meditate on a lot about, the talents. One thing that kind of came to me over the years that I think about that, because when you work with money, you want to be very cautious, because money is obviously, I mean, the Bible says it again and again, man can't worship man and God, right? So you need to consistently be able to kind of find a way to not overemphasize the wealth creation portion of what it is we do. So in this, parable of the talents, one thing that I've always kind of thought is the idea here is to reflect God, right? So when we become born again, when we become saved, we receive an inheritance. So that's really the first wealth that we receive as Christians, is we receive this inheritance of heaven from God, through Christ Jesus. And we are now, it's incumbent upon us to invest that inheritance well. And how do we do that? We share the message, we disciple others, we do the good work that we try to do at that point to reflect Christ and to reflect God. And that's really at the heart of this parable of the talents, right? Is like, you've been given something, and if you were given that inheritance of the message of Jesus Christ, and you never shared it, you never invested it in somebody else, you'd be that person that buried it right in the ground. And what good is it? It's great that you're saved, but you're not going out and you're not investing it well, right? So when we're investing, I think something that I've learned is we're using the mind God gave us prayerfully, and we're doing it with the intention that this money, this wealth creation is going to be used for kingdom purpose, right? At some point in our lives somehow. Whether you're buying a house with that money and you're using it to host others, and maybe you have your small group there, or you have children and you're helping them to evolve in the message of Christ and their sanctification and what have you. So, I think that at the end of the day, that's something that has become clearer to me over the course of the time that I've been doing this.
We could spend half an hour just talking about mistakes that people made, of extreme market timing, going extreme 100% in, and then going 100% cash at the wrong time. We've seen that. Speculative stocks, ones that have gone up really fast, and everybody is hurting into it. Those are two or three of the main ones.
Yes.
If I inherit my mom's 401k, do the RMDs still apply to me at 72?
Yeah, an inherited 401 rollover from an IRA, there's now a 10-year rule that it has to be taken out over the next 10 years.
Doesn't matter my age.
Doesn't matter your age.
What about, is that the same for a Roth?
Yes.
There's no tax implications of a Roth.
But you still have to have that minimum required come out, yes.
But my own 401k, I don't have to do RMDs till I'm
73,
73.
correct.
But you can do QCDs at 70 and a half. Qualified charitable distributions to the church.
Well, it's better than giving
Well, required minimum distributions used to,
you gotta pay it you gotta pay your taxes anyway, you might as well give it to the church.
right, exactly. Those dates used to be the same, and then it's like Focal Point Radio Ministries used to have their golf and annual benefit dinner on the same night, and now they don't. You can go play golf with them sometime, and you come to their annual benefit dinner sometime. Well, it's 73 for RMDs, and it's 7.5 for QCDs. Nancy, you had a question?
Yeah, I've come from a background where I never knew about any kind of investing. My parents were blue-collar workers, but now I'm at an age where if I had heard this 20 or 30 years ago, I would say I could be patient with that, but I'm not at an age where I could say, yeah, I could wait 10 years or 20 years or 15 years. What is your advice to older people that you would give versus, like people in their 40s?
You still need to be a wise steward of the money. and again, try to have it grow. But again, what's your risk, going back to what's your risk tolerance?
Okay. Yeah.
How quickly do you need it?
Yes, and there's a lot of variables. I have a sister that just recently is paying for 24/7 healthcare, or caregiver services, and I'm like, man, that would just totally wipe me out. So.
Right. That's why you have to be careful. I've heard some people say, at 20 years old, you should just put $200 a month in a brokerage account. Just like you pay your federal income taxes, and just get in the habit of doing that. And you saw my graphs over time. That will continue to grow. I think at a previous presentation, I showed you what $300 a month from your retirement account would do over a 20 or 30-year period, and the numbers are astronomical. If you could teach the young people to begin to do that at a very young age, they would just get used to it. Even if you come from a blue-collar family, these are decisions you make. We talked a little bit about it in the budget period. Where am I going to spend my money and how am I going to spend it? So I think if you were a younger person, that's not a bad thing to do. Well, if Frank Pace doesn't have a question for us, then I think we must have covered everything. No questions, Connie, Frank? No? Something you would have added? Yeah, so in our stewardship, we talked about donor advised funds. So if you want to go back and listen to that, donor advised funds are great. I always said the church should be the donor advised fund, but donor advised funds are great tools too. But we'll forego that. I think I had one last question maybe here.
What do you look for in a financial advisor? Obviously, the advice you get is only as good as the source, right? So what do we look for as sort of a fiduciary? But what do we look for? What should we be paying for it? And where do we find them?
Right. We're Fisher Investments. We're a fiduciary. We don't sell anything and make any money on that. We just charge you a fee, and when you do well, we do well. Those are great statements to make in a commercial, because when you talk to other people, they're going to tell you that they're fiduciaries too. And I think it's somebody that you should know, or you should interview. If you don't know anybody, you should ask people that do invest, maybe who they use, because some of them are very different. And both of these guys are very different. And that's why I kind of picked them. So you knew what's in the marketplace, so you can go out and you can do that. It's like, where would you buy a used car? Well, you could go to, the Toyota dealer and see what they had. You could go to CarMax, you could go on the internet. I mean, there's different ways you make financial decisions all the time. I could say go to a Christian, but we've all gone to Christian plumbers and electricians, and they've done horrible work. And it's like it detracts from the name of Christ. So you try to do a little more work. I just think it takes some time on your part. There are a lot of people out there that their main purpose is to build up their practice so they can charge you fees and they can make money. And they might put you in things that they do make more money in than others. Then you can go to fee-based people that say, I'm not going to push you in a stock that is riskier so I can make more money. I'm just going to charge you a certain fee, and you just have to get used to pay that fee.
Is that like an hourly fee? Is it?
So most of them will just charge you a percentage of what they manage for you. And here we're back at Fisher Investments again, right? Why am I paying you more just because my portfolio went up? You're doing the same amount of work. What's wrong with you? But what you forget is the expertise that they bring to the table. And like you pay a 6% commission on the sale of your house, generally speaking, most of these people are going to charge you 1% of whatever they're managing for you. So if they can bring back a return that's 12 or 13% and they picked off 1%, you're still better off than you trying to do it yourself. So you could ask them. And there's different philosophies and different ways of doing it. But I love word of mouth because I can say I've used Bill Evanston. He's my investment guy. I've used him for 30 years. And except for those 4 years that were totally stupid, he's done a pretty good job, right? I've also said that, when the tide rises and all the boats in the harbor go up, when the markets are doing great, everybody loves their financial advisors. Oh man, you should see the returns I'm getting on my donor advised funds because I'm letting Bank of America manage it. Well, everybody's doing great. When the market tanks for 2 or 3 years, everybody hates their advisor because look at this. They never project a downward time and they never know when to get out of the market. And now you're sounding to me like a day trader. I'm going to go in, I'm going to go out, I'm going to pick stocks. I know when we're at the peak and I know when we're at the bottom. And you just don't ever know. Buy low, sell high is what everybody wants to do. So I think you just try to find somebody and you ask them some of the questions that we've gone over today. And we find somebody that, is reputable. That's what I would say as being independent of the two guys up here. But again, they came to answer questions today. You could certainly talk to them if you wanted to. That's not why they came here. They came here to help me answer some of your questions. And they've done a great job. If you would, please give them a big round of applause. They took a Saturday morning. They probably missed a soccer game or a concert with your grandson. But let's pray. And then if you want to ask more questions, some of us will be here for a little bit. God, we do acknowledge that you are the giver of all gifts and that we are to steward our lives in every facet of it. And we want to steward it in a way that when we see you, you say, well done, thy good and faithful servant. And we want to use, even in the parable of the talents, which was focused on the talents that you've given us to serve the body of Christ, we want to serve the body of Christ well. And one of the ways we serve the body of Christ well is by working hard and being a good example to those around us and to share our faith and to engage in partners' conversations, to be active in ministry. Help us to do that well. And help us not to rely on riches because they could rust away. But to the extent that we have a chance to invest, help us to do it wisely and with the right people. We thank you for this time, and I thank you for Adam and Dale, again, that they would come out and spend a little bit of time with us. And I pray you be with us the rest of the day. Help us to worship well this weekend. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.